Hey everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Design Cinema. This is Feng Zhu speaking, and we are at episode 95, which is going to be a continuation from episode 94, and we're talking about form follows function. Except today I'll be going through the entire presentation I did in Paris about 2 weeks ago. So this talk really is aimed for students, those who are learning at home, or you're trying to build a portfolio so you could get a job in this business. If you're a professional, the stuff I'm talking about here is not going to help you as much because you probably already know it since you have a job. So today really is about how to use a couple methods that I personally like to develop your portfolio using the form follows function method. Okay. So let's jump right in. So it's a Friday, it's got most of my work done, and we're ready to let's do this. So I think the presentation will last about maybe an hour to hour and a half. I have no idea. There's not much restriction here, and according to you guys' comments on YouTube, seems like most of you guys don't mind the longer format, which makes things a little bit easier for me as well, so I could just relax and don't have to rush through things. Okay, so let's jump right in. But quickly, you guys might hear some sounds coming from the outside. Someone's doing construction out there, so you might hear some beeping trucks and all sorts of things happening. And I think it's about to rain outside as well. So here in Singapore, when it rains, the thunder sometimes gets really, really loud. Okay, all that said, let's jump right in. Bam, first slide. So let's first cover what is form follows function. Okay, here I have an example of a cassette player. For those who are too young, you probably never actually use one of these in real life, but for us older people growing up in the 80s, we actually listen to our music using this kind of stuff. So what's the best way to describe form follows function? Well, the best way to think about it is generally form follows function designs from the in to out, and the other way, which is function follows form, is outside to in. So let's use this as an example of inside to out. So on the inside, we have this cassette player. This is the thing that the whole thing around it needs to work for this to make sounds, right? So this actually has its own function over form, right? There's also some things inside, but let's just say this is a product that you're trying to make work. So you can see here's a tape. Then to make this which might go around, you need these little gears. So therefore, we have to have little things that turn these little gears. To turn that, you're gonna have to use a motor to make those things spin, right? So here are the motors. To make the motors and the tape holding place, we're gonna have to have a kind of back thing here to put all these things into it. To make that work, we need to have some buttons. So here's a bunch of buttons like play, stop, fast forward, right? That goes on here. And to make all this work, we're gonna need power. So here's the transformers, transistors, right? And that we need a power cord to plug all that in. And of course, we're gonna need a speaker for the sound to come out of. So those are all the packages, right? All the stuff is part of what we call the package that the designer, the external product designer, need to make sure that all those things fit inside this thing. And as a result, we get these designs that has a lot of exposed function, like the buttons and all these input audio volume, right? So the electronic devices from the 80s and the 90s tend to look very boxy, and they have a lot of buttons and things all over them because the function is underneath. Because it's designed from the inside out, your form sometimes is restricted by the things that are inside. But as a result though, you do get these cool things. Like I love this kind of design. I love this kind of early electronic stuff because they're visually very entertaining. And today's talk is all about using this to your advantage when you're designing, right? Because you use your portfolio to build this kind of stuff, and they're really, really cool, and actually is easier as we get into it, right? So this is one example using a cassette player. Let's use another example, which is here, right? Let me keep track on time. When did I start? I think. Okay. So here we have, as everybody are familiar with, Apple product versus, for example, early PC boxes, right? So Apple is a company that highly values the other way of design, which is form over function, right? So for them, the outside package is really, really important. Their products have to look nice visually. So therefore, they are making a certain level of sacrifice on the functionality. So for example, if you have an Apple laptop, you know that they have, for example, only one USB connector. They change their ports to be smaller and smaller. The Mac Air has nothing on it, but it's a pretty cool visually looking device because the products that they're trying to sell is almost like a lifestyle, right? They're trying to make this thing fit into your styling of who you are. So that is very, very important for a company like Apple. So if you're an engineer working here, the outside form governs what goes on in the inside. So that's why I say these kind of things in which form overrides function, it's outside in, right? We have the outside package first to make it look nice. Now all the engineers at Apple have to make sure all their stuff works inside. And that's why you see the early forms of Apple have problems with heat. They might have slower CPUs, they have less RAM. They have all sorts of issues because the engineers are restricted to put all their stuff within this beautifully looking laptop, right? And they've been doing that forever. That's kind of like what put them on the map in the early, the late 90s when they came out with their first iMac. Remember the color one, right? It's a very cool looking form. At the time, PCs were all boxy and they have buttons sticking all over them. They just weren't visually designed. Apple comes along and they take this kind of very functional device and make it stylistically beautiful, and that really put them on the map, and they continue to do so today. So this definitely is a company that really values form, so including their package design. If you look at the way you get their iPhones and iMacs, right, the boxes are pretty cool. Versus, for example, over here, obviously this is not a very fair comparison because I found a PC from the early 90s. I believe this goes back to the 91, 92, right? It's made by Sony. It's actually a video game PC machine, but look at this thing. It's got like a 1.4 floppy drive. It's got all these cool buttons and all these little chunky things, right? This thing looks like it came out straight out of the Alien film, of the Sulaco or something. It's a beautiful looking thing, but all these things are functional driven. There's a lot of things on the outside that's revealing themselves from the inside, So you can see, the heat sinks and all these SCSI drives and video in, video out, power adapter, all this stuff. But it doesn't mean this thing is ugly. In fact, I think it's quite beautiful looking. Both of these products are beautiful looking. It all depends on what you're trying to get at. But to design these two, this one here on the right actually is a bit easier. I'm talking about purely from a visual point of view. Because the function is doing a lot of the work for you, you end up with something that's visually cool, but you don't have to spend time tweaking every little thing. And we'll talk about that in today's presentation. We'll get to that in a second here. Let's look at one more example. Okay, so here on the left, we have some architecture. On the right, we also have architecture, but complete different approach. On the left is form is highly valued. On the right here is function is highly valued. Let's look at these two buildings first. So here we have the Disney Music Hall in Los Angeles, and this is a building called Wangjing Soho in Beijing. In fact, my film studio is inside tower number 2 right about here. Okay, so I know this building quite well since I go here all the time. So beautiful looking buildings, both of these, but they are sacrificing quite a bit of functionality in order to have this cool visual, right? Again, from the outside in, they design the forms first and they try to fit everything on the inside. When you do that, especially for something that's highly functional like a building, you're sacrificing quite a bit of stuff. For example, if the real estate developer was to use this land and just do a really ugly square rectangular looking building or anything like this, guess what? You could probably house maybe twice or even quadruple the amount of tenants in the amount of space this land takes up. But that's going to be an ugly, boxy building that many cities have. So they opted not to do that. Instead, they hired a famous architect to design them this building, right? You guys actually know this is Hadid's building, very, very famous. So, but in return, you have less tenants. And also for those of us who rent this space, we actually have usability issues because we used to have an office in the corner in tower number 2 here. We moved now to the center because in the corner, you have these spaces that are pretty much unusable because you have a bend like this and you have these huge pillars like this. This space here, you cannot put anything there. You can't put an office there. You can't put anything. Maybe you can use it to store some water bottles or something, but pretty unusable space. Unlike if you rented a corner or a square building, well, pretty much 80 to or 90 something percent of the space is usable. This space, our first office was about 68% usability. That means you're paying rent, 100% rent, but using 65% of the space. So you're losing 35% of the rent to nothing. Versus a square building, you're pretty much getting what your money is paid for. But both these are pretty cool. Now let's look at the castle on the right here. Okay, so what is the function of this castle here? Well, the simplest is it's trying to protect these two people, king and a queen, or a noble and the wife, right? And then sometimes they have kids, right? So for those who watch Game of Thrones, it works the same way, because Game of Thrones is it's really designed after these Western European type of things, right? So if, for example, you have the Lannisters, 2 people, 3 people, I forgot how many there are, maybe 4, right? Some key important Lannisters, and look at the entire kingdom they live under, their King's Landing, right? They have a huge castle on top, all this stuff, but all that functionality, the end goal is to protect these people. So look at this castle here. So let's start with these 2 people. Let's function this thing out. Remember, from the inside out, keep that in mind. The inside, we have these 2 people, assuming they have 2 kids, okay? So this whole thing is built to support this tiny little family right here. So here's the bedroom. And then let's keep going here. We probably have a library. Then we have the dining hall. We have the downstairs living space. These churches, European things, tend to have chapels. That looks like a chapel. Then we have the mega cathedral over here. And to make sure we can see the enemies coming, we have all these guard towers in every single corner of the space to make sure that they don't get killed by their enemies and people always trying to plot against them, like Game of Thrones. Down here, we have an inner courtyard, which means we probably have horses and stables and kitchens and all these hands of people that help to maintain this castle, your workers and so forth. And to make this space even more secure, notice they have another outer wall with more guard towers, more thick walls, slanted things to make enemies climbing harder, and they have even more out here. So this is definitely a castle built with military protection in mind. So these people are pretty important to keep this many people working for this 4 people, right? So out of this 4, I'm guessing this castle employs another maybe 200 people, maybe even more, for the benefit of these 4 people. But this form is also very, very cool. There's nothing wrong with this castle. It looks beautiful, but it is driven entirely by function of protecting this family in here. So by looking at this, you also could visually see sort of what it does, right? Just from general knowledge of how things work, you can look at this, go, oh, I think this is a castle. You know what I'm saying? If you ask most people, look at this, if imagine this is a concept design, they'll be like, yeah, this is a castle. Now imagine you show someone this music hall, you're like, what does it do? No idea. Do you know what I'm saying? This could be like someone's house. It could be a museum. It could be, I don't know, a gallery of some kind. It could be a music hall. You have no idea what it does because it's outside in. So the outside package is a beautiful form, but you have no idea what the functions are because it's not shown to you. Same with this thing here. Obviously, it is a building, but is it hollow on the inside? Is it a place where they're developing technology in there, like there's a huge hollow space and a hanging device? You don't know, because there's nothing that tells you what this thing does. It's just a cool visual. So again, both of these things are fine, but when you're building a portfolio, using the right side here is a little bit easier, and we'll get to that right here. Let's go here. Okay, so why do I like this approach? Okay, for yourself, the reason why I like this, right, when you're doing this as a portfolio, is that first it gives you a starting point. When you have function to solve, like the castle approach, right, you have to protect this little family. How do you do it? Okay, build the bedroom, build the walls, build the towers, build the outer walls, build the stables, build blah, 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 right? You kind of go from in to out. It gives you a starting point. And by doing that, it gives you a strong visual hook. Because you have so many layers to design, the visual tend to look more impressive. There's more details. So you could grab the viewer a little bit easier. Using the form only method, you have to make sure your form is really, really well developed in order to attract the user. So it's a little harder. Okay, so the visual hook's a little bit easier to do with function over form. You also have multi-layer design. What this means is that when someone's looking at your portfolio, they could see deeper into your design other than what I call a helicopter drop design. Okay, so let me put that in here to show you what I mean. Here we go. All right, so you guys all seen this. We all do this. I do this kind of stuff. A lot of pros out there do it, amateurs do it, students do it, which is a tower in the middle of nowhere design. Okay, it's all over the concept art scene. Okay, just if you look up like environment concept art on Google, I'm pretty sure in the top hits you're gonna see a tower of some kind in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so why do we all do this, right? Especially pros, we all do this kind of stuff. It's because it's kind of easy, it's relaxing. When we are working our day jobs, we have so many restrictions from our clients and we can't do this, we cannot do that, right? So when we go home and want to draw something fun, we tend to pick subject matters that are a little bit relaxing, so we're not in a high stress situation. And towers are pretty easy to do, right? Draw some kind of shape, triangular, round, pillars, whatever it is. Add the mountains right here and add some guys with a stick looking at it. It's a pretty cool concept art, but there's not much functionality underneath this, and there's no need to. We're doing a visual piece. It's just something that visually looks nice. So for pros, totally fine. We're not looking for work. We just want to do something kind of visually cool. But for a student, and we have this, all you have is things like this in your portfolio. For the recruiter, it's so hard for us to guess what's in your head because you're not showing us any understanding of culture, of history, of how things work. None of it, because it's just the architecture in the middle of nowhere that some helicopter dropped in. Versus, for example, again, I'm using a castle, for example, as a example here, is I look at this thing, right? To support the little family that's inside here, you have other families, you have all these shops, tailors, craftsmen and architects and furniture shops, right? And you want to protect these people, so there's an outer wall. And to protect this even further, they have another outer wall. And I'm pretty sure back in the days there used to be water back in here. Well, make some moat, and then you probably have water out here as well. And then to make sure these people could eat, you have all the farmers surrounding the castle, right? Look at all these farms, right? So this whole thing is not helicoptered in. It started here, inside out, okay? Inside out. I have to repeat that many times because that's generally how function over form works, right? To start from here, you have all this. So you avoid the helicopter design by using this design philosophy, right? So everything looks believable. And if you have something like this in your portfolio, the recruiters and art directors sees your work and they see a deeper meaning to your designs. They could start figuring your brain out on paper. They're like, wow, these designers tend to know how things work. So therefore, if we bring it into a studio, you could probably adopt to other products they're working on. Versus we're looking at this, how do we know if you're able to adopt to projects? Because you're showing us very little other than pure visual. And pure visuals, pros could do it. Other designers could do it, especially for student types. It's not hard to do a pure visual portfolio. But we're not hiring you to do pure visuals. We're hiring you to do design. So we have to see how knowledgeable you are. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so the creative blocks. I've done this many, many times. Sometimes if I'm stuck on a design, I just tell myself, okay, I'm stuck. Let's go back to functionality. What am I trying to solve? What is the first thing I'm trying to get over, right? So in the case, for example, the castle, it's like, okay, let's start simple. Protect these people. What are the ways we could protect them? And we'll get into that with today's presentation. We have so many slides to go, so you guys will see what I mean, okay? Visually detailed, okay? Going back to the whole Mac versus the PC thing, right? Generally, when you have form only, they tend to be clean. Almost all of them tend to be clean. Like cars are like that. These Apple computers, right? The buildings. So there's not too many visuals for you to do. Not saying this is ugly, but it puts a lot of pressure on designer to make it look super, super good without relying on heavy amounts of detail. Versus on functionality, you tend to get a lot of things going on them. So these visuals are going to help your entire package look more interesting for free. You don't even have to come up with it. It comes with the visuals, right? So it's a little bit easier to do when you are designing. Let me go, whoops, not that one, or here. Okay, let me put on the right layer here, right? So it's visually detailed. Next, more believable. We already demonstrated that using these two examples here. When you're looking at an empty tower in the middle of nowhere, it's hard to sell this. When you look at this, it's like, oh, this looks like it makes sense, right? If you think back, for example, I was using the 1979 Alien film. We're talking about a very advanced ship that could go from Earth to some faraway planet. But if you look at the technology in that ship, it looks like it came from the 1980s, right? It's like big buttons and CRT screens. But it looks pretty believable, even if you watch it today. This almost 30 years ago, this film, right? It's very, very believable the way it works. Now, we could design a high technology ship and imagine the bridge. It's just a clean room. There's nothing in it. It's just an egg-shaped clean room. It's lit bright, and that's all. And there's a clean chair. The captain sits on it. There's no controls. There is nothing. He just sits in a chair and goes, take me to planet X. and then the AI takes over and fly to planet X. Now, that design, you could always argue totally makes sense. In the future, maybe that's exactly what it is. But you have not too many visuals to sell this, and it's also very hard to sell this belief to the audience because they're going to look at it and go, really? That's it? I pay all this money to watch this film and that's the bridge? Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but for a student to do that and put it in a portfolio, it is so hard to sell that design to someone looking at a portfolio because they don't know what the heck this is. And it's like, oh, I see an egg with a person sitting in the middle of a room. What is this space? Is it a sound room? Is this a meditation room? And you tell them, no, this is the bridge to control a very advanced spaceship. They're like, really? Okay, I guess I'll believe you then, right? Because you're not showing the versus the 1979 Alien Bridge. You see all these like jet fighter seats and buttons and switches and jumper cable, jumpers knobs and all these little things, lights and green, red, blue, blah blah blah, right? Things overhanging. You look at that, even if you don't say anything, if you saw that concept art, you're like, oh, this looks like a bridge to some spaceship. And that's exactly what it is. So you put that in your portfolio, it's so much easier to sell your designs. Okay, and moving on to the next one. It's timeless, right? The DeLorean from Back to the Future, the Sulaco, right? The original Star Wars films, they're all timeless because they're all using function over form, right? Star Wars, I love these films. Look at them. Giant engine, bridge, right? They're pretty much World War II things in space, right? They're very much function over form. Guns are exposed, engines are exposed, cockpits are exposed, little windlets are exposed. Their piping is even exposed. If you look at the Millennium Falcon, look at that thing. It's like a space hamburger with all sorts of stuff exposed on the top. You got exhaust pipes on the outside. You got the cockpit, right? But that thing is timeless, man. You can look at that today. You can look at it 100 years from now. It is a beautiful design. It's because it's driven by function. Okay. So one more here, and it's a bit easier to the function process, and we'll get to that later as we go through the slides. Okay. And for your portfolio, we mentioned this already. It demonstrates problem-solving skills and it shows an understanding of the world. Super, super important. Again, when you have something like this, how do we know how much the history do you know? How much culture do you know? We don't know, right? When you do this, you are very knowledgeable of the world, and that's going to help you greatly when you are a junior designer working in a studio. So why do I keep saying junior or student portfolio? Because you cannot draw things in your portfolio that's trying to be a concept artist's content that has 20 plus years experience, right? You're trying to draw like this outer worlds, these huge IPs, but you never worked on anything. You don't have any experience, but yet your content is trying to show that you know so much about the world. Generally, that doesn't work well. Maybe 1 of 1,000 students have the knowledge to put that portfolio together, but most will fail at that. And I'll use the next example, the maze, to show you what I mean. Okay, so if you're doing the form over function design, you're gonna have to solve a lot of problems on your own. Look at this maze. Okay, I'll talk about what that means. Okay, versus function over form is not that easy, but it is much easier than this side over here. Let's use the example of making up a culture, okay, a functional culture. So you take something like Egypt, okay, their old kingdom and the new kingdom together is about 5,000 years of history. You're talking about millions of people spending millions of man hours coming up with the architecture, the colors, the language, the patterns, the fashion, everything, right? It took them thousands of years to come up with all this, and that's solved for you. So if you're using Egypt as your backing to make a product, you have most of the problems solved for you. They already figured out the architecture for you. They figured all this stuff out for you. So what we gotta solve from a visual point of view is how to put that together so it's entertaining, okay? And that's doable. And guess what? A big company out there called Ubisoft did that. They actually made a game called Assassin's Creed Origins using Egypt as their history. In fact, they used another one, Greece, for their newest game, right? The Odyssey one. So a huge company like that spent millions of dollars, and they even did not come with their own culture. They use function as a base and they build that function on top. Now imagine you're trying to do form over function, in which you don't have any function to start with. Okay, you're just purely dependent on form. So you don't have any kind of basis to start with. Well, guess what? Let's try to come up with a culture. Okay, this side we have 4,000 years plus or 5,000 plus history. Okay, here, and also millions of manpower. Here, one person, maybe 1 week, to come up with an entire culture on your own based on visuals only and no function. So where do you start? Are they using round shapes, triangle shapes, tower shapes? How their buildings made? Is it marble? Is it mud? Is it wood? Is it sand? What is it? Is it grass, right? Okay, do they have gods? Do they focus on anything? Do they build statues? You're just on a paper just doodling random forms like, oh, maybe this one works, maybe this one works, right? Every single thing is going to become a roadblock. And most students, they get to about here and they get stuck and this piece gets thrown away. There's nothing to continue with. Versus if you're using function, right, to start with the Egyptian culture is a functional culture, right? Most of your stuff has function to it. All the grounding is built for you. So all you gotta do is build on top of that and you have a solution that generally looks pretty good. And this is why most of your AAA games, if you look at 2018, the top selling games that's Western developed, right? Let's take Japan out of the equation because their games are kind of their own market. You take Japanese games and mobile out of the equation. Your top selling games from 2018 are things like Red Dead Redemption 2, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, God of War. You have Shadows of Tomb Raider, right? You have these games. Look at all of them. They're all grounded in history, something to do with Earth. Because when you start dealing with made-up worlds, like made-up alien worlds, and especially put sci-fi on top of that, the development goes crazy. The cost goes up, the time goes up, everything goes up because you're selling form over function in many of the cases because there's no grounding behind it. So you're coming up with everything and the visual has to all sell. And that creates a very difficult development environment because no one says it's wrong. Because, for example, you go back to the Egypt example, okay, if you're developing, say, Wargens, right, you have a pyramid from history. Okay, the most we could do with this is that we add a temple down here, and we put some beams. So maybe this is not real to the real Egypt, but every single piece, functional, it's already been designed, it's solved for you. We designed this out. And this probably works. Palm trees, some camels, right? Now, in a world that's made up, imagine, back to this here, no art director is going to say, hey, I have an idea. Let's put an obelisk on top of the pyramid like this. Okay, I think that'll look pretty cool. That's never going to happen in the development cycle of this game because this never happened. It's not part of the history. It's not part of the function. So no one's going to bring this up. But imagine you're doing a made up world and you have a pyramid. Now it'd be like, I think it looks cool if you have a spire on the pyramid, okay, like this, for the sake of just having spires. Now the art direction becomes very weird. It's like, okay, is it this big? Is it this big? Is it this big? Is it a cylinder? Is it a thin beam? You could go on forever debating this, and this leads to all sorts of development problems, extended timelines, and of course money. So that's why you rarely see sci-fi games in outer worlds being made, and generally when they are made, a lot of them run into development problems because they are really trying to solve the entire world using visuals, and it's very hard to do that. It's hard to sell that stuff to the audience. Okay, so if you imagine you're a student, you're learning, and you're trying to do what even the big giant companies have a hard time doing, you're probably not going to make it in terms of your portfolio. So let's start with something simple, okay? And today I'm about to give you guys a bunch of solutions to do that. So let me take a quick pause here just in case this thing crashes, and we'll jump into the methods of building a portfolio. Okay, let me take a pause. All right, and we are back. So now I will share with you guys a few methods that I use when I'm designing my own stuff when applying function over form, okay? And if you're trying at home, give these things a shot. It's kind of easy, okay? Compared to just doodling on paper and trying to find a form that sells, versus for example, the outside in. We're going to start from inside out, okay, and design all this stuff from it. Okay, but first I have to share this little knowledge here, right? These little fun things, which is concept artists love towers. We used an example earlier, of the helicopter tower thing. You see towers everywhere on the internet scene. Again, for pros doing it, who cares? It's fun, we enjoy it. We're not using that to find a job, right? But if you're doing this as a student, even if you like towers, I have a suggestion, which is put some function into the towers. Don't just make it a random shape in the middle of nowhere. Think about the function, because in the real world, towers serve purpose. Let's look at it. Boom. Okay. Here have how many examples? 10 examples of towers built by human beings. And let's run through them really quickly to spark your idea of maybe next time you want to do a tower. By simply putting a function on top, it's going to make the thing a little bit more believable, and maybe that'll spark way more creativity. So let's look at the first one. Okay, we have the Eiffel Tower here, right? So what does this thing do? The purpose of the Eiffel Tower is a radio tower, which is the little thing up here is the main purpose of this tower, is to send the radio signal as far as possible to get over the curvature of the earth. So I hope we don't have flat earthers in our audience. I don't know, who knows. But anyways, they build these towers tall to circumvent the curvature of the earth so the signal could go as far as possible. Okay, and so therefore the purpose of the Eiffel Tower and all radio towers is to get this antenna as high as possible. To go beyond this, you have balloons, and of course ultimately you have satellites, all of it which is to send a signal to go around the Earth's curvature, right? So that is the purpose of that tower. Let's look at the next one. Military defense towers, right? The castles. So why are they towers? Because they need to be higher up so they can see the enemy, and 2, it's easier to attack the enemy, and 3, it makes the enemy hard to climb up to you. So their purpose for being a tower is different than a radio tower, but they're both towers, right? So look at, they have little tiny windows on them so enemies can't shoot inside of them, right? So all function driven. Again, we have to stress the word function. Inside out, right? The inside is this thing, and they start from there and they have the solution blah 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 as this, right? The inside here is we have a little guard with a bow and arrow, and we have to make this guy work functionality wise, and we end up with this tower. Okay, next we have a fire watch tower, which is similar to the military tower here, but this is not for war. This is not for killing people or defending against people. It's to see further out. So therefore the function changes a bit. Notice big giant windows compared to the tiny little windows on the defense tower, right? So the purpose here from inside out is on the inside, we have a little ranger with the binoculars, and we have to make this little person here see fire as far as possible. So fire towers are generally built on top of mountains, and they're built with huge windows all around so they can see forest fires, and that's the purpose of that. And notice this little wind thing here. These are all function, right? That's to determine the airflow, and they usually have some radio stuff on top as well, right? So that is a watchtower, a fire watchtower. Next, we have a water tower. This one has no people, but it also have a purpose of why it's a tower. Function driven. The function is what? We put water here, and using gravity, this water kind of drains downwards, right? This is a very America thing. I'm not even sure this exists in Asia. I don't think I've seen it too much out here. Well, they have it in a smaller scale, but this thing, when you're driving across the states, you're seeing a lot of, like you're going across Kansas and Tennessee and stuff, you see the water towers everywhere, especially in towns. So the purpose, again, the function is to have the water use gravity to go down. You also have silos who use similar methods, but inside out. Okay, I'll be repeating that quite a bit, inside out. Next is clock tower, right? Big Ben here in London. So what's the functionality? What's on the inside? A clock, right? The gears are all inside. But to make this work and to make everyone see it, they build the tower as high as possible so everybody around the city could see what time it is. And notice the clock are on all 4 sides. So that way, no matter where you are, you can see the time. So functionality driven, very different than the previous ones, but everybody is a tower. Okay, let's keep going here. Lighthouse tower. So same thing. What's on the inside? The inside is this tiny little lamp over here. So all of this is built to make that work, built out of function. So the purpose of light tower, of course, is for make ships see the land, right? Also broadcast signals and so forth. So therefore, it has to try to be as high as possible for make that light work, and also made out of glass, right? All of this is function. All of this is function. So let's keep going. Air traffic control towers. So what is the purpose of this? Well, this purpose is for the ATC, the air traffic control people, to see the planes on the runway and incoming towards the airport. So sometimes they have windows that are slanted, so that way they can look down at the airplanes parked very close to the tower, right? See as much as possible. They're also very tall to see as far as possible, right? They also have some radios to contact the to airplanes, okay? So, and sometimes they have these crazy colors on them, especially in the military zones, to prevent planes from flying into them, right? Because planes and towers don't go together well. So generally they're painted white and they have lights on top of them, and sometimes they have these kind of crisscrossing colors. Sometimes they're red. It's just to prevent these planes from hitting them. Okay, next one, religious monument towers. So this one, there is an inside, but of course it's not a tangible inside. The tangible religious things are the gods that whoever believes in them, and generally your religious towers all go upwards as well, because most religions, the gods are in the air, so we kind of go upwards. So they're also inside out. So we start with like a statue or some kind of belief system, and we boom, 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 build all around it, right? Like if you go to Notre Dame, these huge cathedrals, if you actually go inside, the functionality is religious, right? We have this altar in the middle and everything built around to let the sunlight in, right? For those who read the book Pillars of Pillars of Eternity or something like that, right? They talk about the whole building of a cathedral. So quite interesting book. I'm not even done with it yet, and I forgot the title of the book. It's like Pillars of something, forgot, but it's a pretty cool book. I'm like page 500 of 1,500. It's a crazy thick book. Okay, let's keep going here. A rocket launch tower, right? Purpose, what's on the inside? The inside of these actually is way in here, okay? Either as a satellite, space equipment, or astronaut, is these little tiny things needs to go into space. So as a result, we have to build a giant rocket with all this. What is all this for? To hold fuel, right? So it gets tall as possible, so it can put fuel. And to make this thing stand up and not fall over, we have these structures next to it to hold it up so it launches, it doesn't fall over, right? All of it function driven and inside out. Inside is these little, right? It's pretty crazy. Think about the Apollo programs and the Gemini programs. These 2-3 astronauts, tiny little thing being powered by this enormous bomb essentially to make it go up. And the result is a tower. It's a long tower. And of course, a simple one is we actually live in towers too as a person. So inside out, what's on the inside? Some person, you know what I'm saying? And then to make this thing look cool, we go up and we go out and we have this tower, okay? So these are all functional towers, and each one serves a different purpose. The only one here that is form driven and not function driven, although it's a tower, is the last one here. That's why I put it last. So this thing is in Shanghai. It's definitely a very form driven building, but it's also extremely functional. If you actually go there on the very top, they explain that this building, the way the form is curved like this, is for the air to go around it, creating a very efficient energy building. So it's actually quite interesting. It's a double layer building. As you can see, the actual building is inside here. It's encased with the outer glass. So I think they have some kind of purpose to make the energy not escape or the heat. So it's pretty cool. So it actually has quite a bit of function behind its form. But the rest of these 9 is all the forms are result of function. Okay, and so next time you're designing a piece of tower, try to apply even the most basic function behind it, and maybe it'll give you a starting point. And something else you notice, most of these towers, they only do one thing. They don't do multiple things. So radio tower just says radio, watch tower just does watching. They don't combine them. They don't put, for example, on the Eiffel Tower, you could put a clock on here, I'm sure, right? So then you solve that purpose. You could, I guess, what else could we put on here? We could put a giant searchlight on top, I guess. Actually, I think they do have that for entertainment purposes, right? But most of the time, most towers do one thing. So when you're designing too, don't over design these kind of things. Just give yourself a simple function and solve that function and start from there. Okay, let's keep going. I think we're about 40 minutes in. All right. Now actually start the key parts, which is my approaches. Okay, so now if you want to take some notes, you're drawing along, this is time to really pay attention now, because I'm about to give you some design ideas. Okay, the first one I like to use as a function is natural causes. So the earth gives us the problem. We solve it using function. So for example, we did this for episode 94. Weather is a problem. And to solve it using functionality, we use architecture and materials to solve that function. So in this case, for example, I decide to hide the inhabitants in a canyon to get out the cold. So the function is location. We also use a Japanese architecture, and we thought, what if we make the buildings all encased? And instantly we have a visual that's very strong, but at the same time, it's born out of functionality versus purely just drawing random shapes, right? For example, if you're using form, I could be like, maybe it's a bunch of spheres here. Maybe it's a bunch of triangle buildings, right? I could draw this all day long and not have something cool because I'm depending on outside in. But if I go from inside out, it's like, okay, if we have people here to make that stand, we have to put a support beam. We have to make this get out the cold, so we got to build walls, right? We have to insulate these walls. I've got to build more stands this way. And instantly I have a function over form design that solves this problem here. Okay, next one. Still dealing with nature, right? Interesting location in nature will give you that as well. So here, if we pick, for example, a pretty cool location, you see the water and the mountains. Well, what can we build here that's function driven first? Okay, instead of just drawing random towers here, let's do something about this. Okay, so I decided to say, hey, what if it's a dam? Okay, ancient dam here. Well, that is my starting point. By having a dam, I have to solve, for example, how does a dam function? Does it have towers on it to watch for enemies trying to destroy this place? What happens to water that gets overrun? So we have to drain that stuff out. And all this is all real. I don't have to design anything. All I have to do is find the good references and put it together. People who work here need to live in a town. Whoever is in charge of this town probably lives maybe on a castle above the town. And instantly I could start putting all this together and have an environment that is believable, driven from inside out. Function started and we get the solution from the function. Okay, so by the way, notice I put a tower in all my designs. So just in case you guys like towers, I try to put one in each one. So here's like a watchtower driven by function. So it's very cold. So they use a lot of insulation here. And this tower is actually Japanese based. Here's another tower. So maybe this is a tower the noble guy lives in. So it's going to watch over the water to make sure the enemy doesn't get their hands on it. Okay. Next one. Man-made causes, right? So we had causes that was nature-based. What if it's not man-made cause, and how do we design function around that? So first example I have is, for example, overpopulation. Okay, so here's a scale model of Hong Kong. This is a Kowloon area. This no longer exists, but basically it's a very populated place. All these are buildings. So we've seen this before. It's a cool visual, but we've seen it before. For example, these very tight alleyways. So I thought, okay, how could I design a function based on overpopulation that's visually strong and doesn't require me to depend purely on form only? So I thought, what if we change the function so that the usable space inside a building is now on the outside? What I mean by that is like hallways, lobbies. So if you go into a condo, you have a lot of space for walking, but you actually don't live in that space. What if we get rid of that space and say all your streets are your hallways and lobbies? So all your homes are now facing directly to the street. So now your buildings become entirely functional. So when you go to your apartment, your elevator is on the outside and we open that door, that's your house, right? That instantly creates a new visual that probably hasn't been done before. So all your elevators, all your public spaces are all out in the open. So every building are missing halls. Like you go into buildings in this world, there are no lobbies, there are no hallways, there are nothing. Every door connects directly to the functionality of it. And that, bam, creates a visual that's quite cool. And by the way, I'm gonna do all these as design cinemas. I think this is a great way for me to have content for the next maybe 8 or 9 episodes in which we'll actually visual this stuff out. We started with episode 94 already, so we'll continue. 95 we'll finish this thing up, and maybe we'll do the dam version, right? And we'll keep going, so that way you can actually see me applying these using function to get the design, right? Look at this, right? No public space. So I mean, the inside trains go through buildings, right? These are very cool visuals that comes almost for free if you start with function first, versus saying like, okay, how do I do overpopulation? I could draw buildings all day long, but I don't have any kind of design motive behind it other than pure visual. Here, this is driven by design, but it's driven by function, right? So here we have a visual that's a result of it, but the result came from me coming up with a function, okay? So let's go to the next one here, which is heavy pollution, right? We make things very polluted. So how do we make this into a visually strong thing born out of function? Well, the generic way will be like this: heavy pollution, so we clean it up, we make it all green, but we've seen that before. What if we go all in? What if we say these people live in this world, right? Just don't care. We're gonna make it even more dirty. So this whole city becomes way polluted. As a result, if you think from a functional point of view, then we're gonna seal all our windows up. Okay, so in this city, maybe windows are completely redundant. They're not even built anymore. So this entire world has no windows. So every building is just these monolithic structures that has no windows. therefore creating a very strong visual hook driven by function. You don't have to do anything. Just draw city as is, get rid of the windows. So here's a couple more, and all these towers have no windows on them, and they vent all their dirty stuff into the air, right? Just huge ventilation systems. Basically, the population here just gives up. It's like, you know what? We're not going to clean up our city. We're going to just make it even dirtier. We hide in the inside. We don't care what's going on the outside. So all their buildings look like these monolithic towers, right? Just everywhere. But it's great. It's easy to sell that to the audience. You don't have to do too much to sell this world to anybody, okay? And maybe on the inside, as a contrast, they make all these really bright, colorful worlds on LCD displays and lights to kind of trick themselves to think that the world is pretty, even though on the outside it's all dirty, right? And I can't wait to draw some of these out. I think it'd be pretty fun to explore these. Okay. Next, number 3, swapping timeline. Okay, another function over form kind of design. So what you could do is find something from another time period and combine it with a different time period. So here an example of like ancient grand mining, right? Mining at this scale is very modern. It's something that's done with trucks and heavy equipment, right? But why can't we combine this with ancient world? So instead of machines, we use donkeys. Instead of giant industrial smelters, we use this kind of old school way of melting metal, right? All the buildings are built out of bricks and towers, ancient materials. Therefore, you have something that looks very visually cool, but it doesn't exist. But you could combine it to make it very, very believable because all of this exists on its own. In fact, the other day I was kind of on the airplane and I was scanning through some films and I noticed there's a movie called Robin Hood. I didn't watch it, but I noticed they were using this, you know what I'm saying? So it's pretty cool. I go, whoa, they actually put it, obviously it's not based on this thing, but they came up with it on their own with the same common idea. They had these grand mining things in that film. Even though it's kind of like a medieval film, they had these kind of like ginormous mines. It's kind of like this. So it's pretty cool. So there are designers out there using this philosophy, right? And that's exactly this. Another one, right? Here's a freight train station, I believe in somewhere in Eastern Europe. I think this is in Czech Republic. Pretty cool functional space. Trains go in, load it up, they leave, right? Functional driven, cool visual. So how can I make this more interesting for my portfolio? Well, I could swap time period, right? Which we talked about earlier. So you take this philosophy, this design, don't change a thing, but we're going to swap out the function using ancient world. So instead of trains, we use horses pulling wagons. Instead of these metallic things, we use medieval way of building things, right? Like these kind of gear-oriented devices. But you keep the design looking like that. Now all of a sudden, you have a very cool visual, functional driven, but all the solution is given to you. You don't have to make this stuff up. You have the towers, you have the machines, you have the horses, you have the wagons, you have the walkways, you have the tunnels. Replace all that into here, and this form will look now like a medieval factory, but it's a visual you haven't seen, but it is very much grounded and rooted in culture and history and functionality. And that's the whole point I'm trying to get to with your portfolios. So it's not something you look at and go, I don't get this thing, I don't know what's for. All art directors looking at this will be like, hey, that's pretty interesting. I've never seen this before, but this designer seems to know how things work. And that's what you want to hit. Okay, next. Show interesting real world design. Sometimes you don't have to design a single thing. The word design, right? Let me just write it here, is very dangerous because sometimes when students see this word, they think I have to do my own thing. That is just part of what design is. Design is simply showing something to visually stimulate something, at least in our world, right? We use visuals. So we visually stimulate the viewer using whatever methods we want to do. So coming up with your own thing is one method. But showing somebody something they haven't seen, even though it's real, it's totally fine. Because most people have never seen, for example, the inside of a nuclear reactor. They've never been there. You show that, it's fine. And many, many video games and films do this. They take you to interesting locations. And even, it doesn't have to be a nuclear reactor. It could just be Paris, right? Most people haven't been to Paris, so you film movies there. That's why all these Mission Impossible, all your James Bond films, they go to Rome, Paris, Germany. They go to these famous locations. Notice they rarely pick locations that are visually not that strong. They don't go there. If they go to Paris, you know the Eiffel Tower shows up. If they go to Rome, you know the Colosseum is going to be in there somewhere, right? It's given. The reason why they're doing that is because they're showing the viewer something that the viewer generally haven't experienced on their own, and that could totally be considered design. Even though you didn't come up with anything, you're redressing the set to tell the story. So showing interesting world locations without you designing a single thing is totally fine. So here are some examples. I just randomly picked things I thought was cool. Okay, inside a research ship. I haven't been on one. I'm pretty sure most of us watching YouTube right now haven't been inside one. But I find them to be fascinating because they have all these kind of, bridges on little submarines. They have all these things to tow things, radars. Look at all these deep sea monitor stations. They have all these deep diving things. They have engine rooms, right? Just build all these rooms out. You have maybe 7 or 8 pieces just based on this. You don't have to design a single thing, all based on reality, and you have a portfolio piece. Because things like this could go into video games like Tomb Raider. It could go into your what you call it, those kind of adventure games, right? This could also be in a film. This could be in a science fiction film. It could go into so many pieces. And if you showcase that you're knowledgeable in this, that you're able to do the research, art directors will love you for it. And you didn't design a single thing. Because this stuff, majority of science things, historic stuff, cultural stuff, they're copyright free. You're not stealing anything. You're just using existing things. So, oil tankers and whatnot, they're all okay to use. So it makes things a little bit easier. Okay, next, for example, pick another one just as is. Windmills are really cool, right? You do see these show up in video games here and there. They're very cool functional things, right? Again, we're based on function, right? Everything I'm picking is functional based. So all this stuff is a result of making something work. So windmill is the same thing, right? Inside out. Inside, the purpose of windmill is to grind things, right? To grind grain and all sorts. So we start from here and we build out. To make this work, we have all these things to make it turn. The whole windmill itself turns like a tank turret. It's a very interesting device. And I'm guessing out of 1,000 people, maybe 1 has been inside a windmill, maybe 0. So you draw this as is, you build this in 3D, you put it into a scene, you put a couple of warriors having a sandwich next to a windmill. It's really pretty cool. You don't have to do anything. This works as a portfolio piece. Trust me, because there's so many games I could use this type of stuff. Okay, let's keep going here. Real world period pieces. So the other ones is real world locations, whatever you want. Period pieces means this took place in history, generally somewhere between 50 years and earlier. It's a time period in which most people have never experienced. For example, none of us has walked in London in 1800s. None of us have lived in the Egyptian times. None of us actually really have lived in anything beyond probably 50 years. It's early enough for the entertainment industry to use. And that's why you see films like Braveheart. You see films like Gladiator. You see films like the English Queen movies. They're always being made, right? Why are they doing that? Because it is entertainment. Just because this world is real, but because it took place in a time period that none of us can experience, it's the same thing as making up an alien world. Both of these worlds are something we cannot experience anymore on our own. So therefore, they could fall into the entertainment category. So you as a student, you don't have to make up stuff. Use real-time period. They already solve all the functionality for you, put in a portfolio. And again, that's what Ubisoft's been doing with all their Assassin's Creed games, right? So let's pick some. For example, for me, I like this kind. I like airplanes, as you guys know. So airfields from the 1950s, right? They don't exist anymore, unless maybe you go to a small town in America. But they're pretty cool. They have old planes in them. They have the whole old school mechanic things in it, tow trucks, cool stuff. Build this stuff out, put a small story around it. Maybe some old pilot and he lives in Montana or something. He flies people in and out of the mountains. Who knows, right? Come up with a story and use all this free visuals, all this functionality. It's all free. You don't have to design anything. All this stuff you can use as is. You can use these planes as is. Nothing's gonna happen. No copyright issues. You're just retelling history, but it makes beautiful portfolio pieces. Okay, let's find another one. Shanghai. Okay. Shanghai in the 1920s, really cool visuals, right? Shanghai in the 1920s and 1930s was considered the New York of Asia. It was like the entertainment hub of Asia. You have a huge explosion of the art movement in Shanghai in the 1920s, in which Art Deco was coming in, a lot of French influence, a lot of English influence, a lot of stuff was coming together. So it created a city full of fun visuals. So you don't have to design anything. Just show us this in a story point, block these into 2:3:5 film ratio, pick some subject matters to render up, you're good to go. And you don't have to create a single thing. In fact, later I have some demos I have my team do to show you guys what we could do with these. Okay, so this is all period pieces. So if you're interested in any kind of time period, use it, design it. I mean, not even design it, just do as is. Look at the game Kingdom Come Deliverance, right? Game does really well. They just took Bohemia back in I think their game takes place in 1400s, right? 600, 700 years ago. They just used existing things and made an entertainment product out of it. You could do the same thing with your portfolio, and it shows a knowledge of history, knowledge of culture, and of course, most important, that you research things. You simply did not just make stuff up. Okay, why are we here? Next, doink. Remove functions, another good one, which is you take something, for example, a city, and remove cars in this case, right? I remove cars. And so what if the whole city is powered just by trains? There's no cars anymore. Well, that changed the visuals, but it gives you a functional things to start with. Remember, inside out. Inside is carry a passenger throughout the city, but you cannot use cars. So the whole city is powered by trains, and that creates a beautiful visual. As you can see here, trains exist, tracks exists, these research stuff out there. All I gotta do is get rid of the streetcars, and now you have a new visual that could power a variety of IPs. And even if the IP have cars, the art director can see that you're able to visualize this kind of stuff very, very nicely. Okay. Next, remove functionality. For example, what if there are no airplanes and airships became the norm, right? Airships are pretty cool. They're heavily functional driven. So imagine a city that's powered by airships. So, malls, shopping, all this kind of stuff. All this stuff exists. You don't have to do anything. Just put in a portfolio, and it's pretty cool. Let's keep going. Look to the past for the vision of the future. I love this way of designing because it's almost cheating. Because if you look back to the 1930s, 1940s, they did a ton of designs of what they think the future looks like. And those ideas are very different than for us now to try to find the vision of the future, because we know so much more. We have iPhones, we have iPads, we have AI, and all this kind of stuff. So the visual package is very different excuse me, than what they came up a long time ago. Let me drink some water here. Excuse me. Look at these concepts from the early like 1930s, 1940s. They're thinking a little bit different than how we think now. But the visuals behind them, a lot of it's driven by function. Look at this. These like hydroplane trains. Look at all everything's running on water. Hydroplane cars. Okay, beautiful designs here that you don't see anymore. But imagine design your world to be a hydroplane world. The whole world exists on water. You use cars. Obviously, you can't copy this. This stuff is copyrighted. But what I'm talking about is the function or the idea behind it. That idea you could use, right? So everything's running on water. It's beautiful. Look at this stuff, right? Elon Musk is trying to do something like this right now. Magnetic strip tunnel vehicles, right? So it's pretty cool. Let's keep going. Look, cars that could run on tracks. Beautiful function. Why not? You cannot use this car design, but you can use the idea behind it. Look at this moving office design. I think this office is like moving on tunnels. I don't know exactly how this works, but it sounds pretty cool. Or some kind of weird subway track moving. Okay, look at this. Look at all this stuff. Look at the police thing here, right? These police, they have the red light built into their vehicles. I'm sure if you run a red light, they just chase you down. It's pretty cool where they could stop traffic. Beautiful stuff. You actually see some of this show up in the Fallout games, right? So flying cars, obviously. Look at this, drones in warehouses, which is happening now, with Amazon drones. But look at the way the drones are designed. They're very different, than today's stuff. So it's going to help you start to see things in terms of functionality differently. Now look at this, personal vehicles, which have now segways, came from some of this. All right, let's keep going here. Oops, not close. Next. Look at this. Right, it's a giant lamp above an underground city. So in fact, the movie Matrix 2 and 3 used this for their Zion design, right? So it's kind of taking place as a sun. We have Bridge World, pretty cool. Look at this thing, it's really cool. It's like a biodome. So when I saw this, I was like, what a cool functional visual thing. So imagine the world is all like winter, but inside these biodomes, it's summertime, right? And that creates a beautiful visual driven by function that you haven't seen before. But when someone look at some portfolio like this, they're gonna be like, wow, this is a really cool idea, pretty cool stuff. And you're getting the idea from a long time ago, right? So there's tons of these. I won't run through every single one of these, but look at this, right? Here's a magnetic strip vehicle, right? All these kind of stuff are just so cool, right? And for these, again, you cannot copy these exactly because these are illustrations, therefore they're copyrighted, but the idea behind them is still valid today, especially if you're building a portfolio. Okay. We're coming up to the end here. So last one is combined functions. Okay, So what I mean by here is, like, let's take windmill for example. In the real world, they grind grain, right? Most of them, they grind something. So they don't actually, for example, power things. So for example, we could say like, hey, maybe these windmills are powering light bulbs. What's wrong with that? It's pretty cool. Recently I saw a game called Dishonored 2. They're actually doing that. They're using these windmills to power the electricity in the city. Same kind of idea there, right? So except mine, maybe here it's a medieval time period, right? So like these ancient windmills. Art directors love windmills. They're fun to draw. You put them in a valley somewhere, right? And then they power a medieval town like this, and they have some light bulbs or something. Pretty cool. And all of it, I need to stress again, exists. You don't have to design anything. All we have to do is use things that exist, recombine it, tweak the functionality, and we have a new design. Okay. Next, okay, ancient modern city. So this sounds like an oxymoron over here, right? But what I mean by that is you take the layout of an ancient city, but use the modern structure of building, which we make buildings go up. So I did some quick photo bash over here of using, for example, this traditional Japanese homes. In fact, we stack them. So you get something that might look like this. So you get an ancient way of layout, but all the buildings go vertically up. So it looks like a modern city. So functionally driven, but visually very, very strong as a result. Okay, so that's what I mean by combined function. Take two things that generally don't belong to each other, but you make it work functional, and then you get a new visual. Okay, so that's the 8 things that I'm showing you guys here. So let's run through them real quick, right? Combined function. Next, we have look to the past with visions of the future. We have remove a function. Okay, we have real world period pieces, okay, in which you don't have to design anything. We have showing interesting real world designs, not just time period, but anything. So you don't have to design anything here either. Swapping timeline, which is used all the time. In fact, we talked about earlier the Jurassic Park. That's exactly what Jurassic Park is. You bring something from a prehistoric time into the modern world, and boom, you have an entertainment product, right? So you design that. Okay. Man-made causes like pollution, overpopulation, and then of course you have natural causes. So in the next many episode Design Cinema, I'm hoping to run through every single one of these examples and draw them at least into rough sketch form, so you guys can see how we apply all this stuff. Going a little too far here. How we apply all this stuff to design. So let me take one more break here, and I'll show you guys some of the examples that using these that have done. Okay, so let me stop here and we'll continue. All right, and we are back. So let's get started with some examples of the various topics, and I'll show you guys how I actually use those to design some of the solutions, and you will see soon. Okay, so let's get started. So here's the formula. Okay, this is where all comes together. So real world culture plus time period plus some kind of function gives you the design. Okay, so in cases like real world, like castles, right? Real world culture. So for example, you pick England. Time period 1500s, function protect the Lord, so therefore you have a castle. Boom, design solution, right? If you want to do the one in episode 94, the real culture is Japan, right? Remember we did Japan? I will write it, just say it. Japan. Time period is Edo period, 1600s, right? Function to live in a very cold environment. Boom, I have to come up with design solution, right? And let's try to pick another ones. For example, the what else do we have? The pollution one, right? Real world cultures, maybe current day or even slightly sci-fi. It's up to you, right? Time period is say 2030, right? The culture is maybe, let's just say it's Asia, it's Hong Kong, right? That kind of building. Time period is 2030. The function is heavy pollution solution, right? So use this, fill it in, and start your design. So let's start, but before we do that, some tips. Okay, quick tips. I don't want this episode to run super long, so I'll run through this real quick. First, get really good references and use them. Okay, next, write notes down. Don't keep in your head. These are things I got from experience from teaching so many students. Just because you have references doesn't mean that, you know, they have pages and pages, but when they start drawing, they don't use it. And two, they say all these things out, but because they haven't written it down, sometimes when they start going to Photoshop, they forget about it and miss out a ton of functionality due to the fact that they forgot. So write things down, okay? Use sketches to sort out ideas, which I'll show you very quickly soon. just doing rough stuff, which we did in episode 94. Okay, and sketches are for yourself, so you don't have to make them nice. The final presentation is the key. The images that's going to go in your portfolio is the key. So you don't have to make these sketches beautiful, right? Don't do those kind of fake sketchbook things for the sake of showing that off. You could do that separately as a complete different thing. But when you're designing, you can make these sketches into chicken scratches. It doesn't matter. As long as you understand it, that's fine. Okay. Use photo bashing to visualize the scene. So I'll show you an example of this in a second here. This is a method I've been using lately, and it's very, very good. So photo bashing, this term, a lot of professionals don't like it because you end up with really bad looking images, like especially if a student don't know how perspective and fundamentals work. The perspective is off, the lighting is off, blah, blah, blah. But another way to use photo bashing, which I'll show you, okay? Don't commit too early, which means focus on your sketches and notes. Don't just fall in love with your drawing 10 minutes in. Really plan this stuff out, solve the function, and then get into design. Okay, avoid heavy detailing in 3D. Nowadays 3D is being used a lot in concept design, but in the beginning, don't commit too early. Get your designs down before you commit to too much 3D. Keep it simple. Okay, one visual hook is enough. Remember the tower example I showed? The Eiffel Tower just does radio. The military tower just does guarding, right? The fire watchtower just watches out for fire with big glass. Don't try to cram too much stuff into your designs. Just do one thing, one visual hook. Okay. When doing period pieces, resist designing. Okay. When doing real world stuff, resist designing. Why did I put this here? Because I deal with this even in a real student environment in which we pick up a project like, let's say, Shanghai 1920s, right? And I tell my team, hey, we're doing Shanghai 1920s. I need a street scene from Shanghai 1920s. Sometimes you will see like a weird building show up or a weird vehicle, and you're like, what is this? And designer's like, well, I thought it'd be cool if I added something to this. It's like, no, we're doing a period piece. This is historically mostly accurate. You know what I'm saying? We don't add sci-fi into this. We don't add a weird tower. We don't add a weird costume. The whole point of doing period pieces, because period pieces are really cool. Now you can add period pieces within history, probably works, especially if the older you go, the more leeway you have. For example, if you're doing something that's 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you could mix match things that are probably 200 to 300 years apart. Nobody will know. Like Gladiator got a lot of problem with that, right? Like if you ever watched it behind the scenes with Gladiator, the director actually says he mixed match a bunch of stuff that are actually 200 to 300 years apart. But most of your audience don't know that because it's so far in history. You're not going to know that the sword he's holding is from a different time period than the shield that he was using, for example. So, but they're still using historic things. Gladiator did not put a spaceship in there. Gladiator did not put a car in there, right? When you start doing period pieces and start making stuff up and designing your own architecture, designing your own vehicles, you can have a problem. Same thing in designing real world stuff. If you want an office design, don't put sci-fi towers in the background. Don't design weird things that doesn't exist, right? So we gotta say resist designing, because these two things are cool as they are. It doesn't need you to add more to it. All we need you to do is reset dress it to show that time period at the best way you want to show it, and that's all you need to do. Okay, so now let's jump in. So my first example is using that dam example, right, of the water. So here's the reference images, because we're going to go in the same order as my tips: ref, notes, sketch. Okay, in this order. Ref. So I chose a waterway. It looks like it's in Asia. I'm going to use a ancient Chinese architecture to put this together, because I used my team in Beijing to do this example. So it's easier if I use a culture that they're very, very familiar with. So we could do these fast, because this was done purely for the Paris talk. So it actually took a week of my team's time to put this together. So I could not go over time. So let's do something that's quite easy for everyone to put together. So here are my references for the valley, the water, as well as some of the architecture. Okay, you can see here. I'm going to run through these pretty quick, because in the next episodes, like 96, 97, we'll go into details of how we do these. Okay, here are some interiors, right, of the same space. So here's some of the architecture I like. All real world. Remember, don't over design. Don't add your own stuff too much. Keep it all reference based. We're only going to retell the functionality differently. So that's all we need to do. Okay, so we're going to combine this and come up with a visual. So once we have that, it's time for notes and sketches. Similar to what we did last week with or episode 94 with the snow one. So here are some of my rough sketches, and these are just drawn raw. I didn't care if these look nice or not. I just drew these exactly how you saw in episode 94. We didn't undo them all the time. We try not. There's no need to make these pretty. All we gotta do is make this work. So I thought, okay, let's have a waterfall here. Come down. We have some guard towers over here. We have the town over here, and the village elder that's in charge of the town over here. We probably have only one bridge going in, so that way they protect themselves in case they're under attack or something, right? So that's sort of where I figured all this stuff out from. I have one more sketch of the interior, right? Different angle of this town. So you can see here's the single bridge leading in. We got a couple entrances, Chinese traditional kind of these castle entrances. You have the main town here. You have a mountain. There's the dam itself, and possible camera angles I'll be using to do these shots. Some references to show my designers. Right. So in my role here, I just ended at the rough sketches. The next images you see are done by my team after I've given these rough sketches as well as my references and did about a quick 30-minute meeting to go over the spec. So I'll show you what they put together using these sketches. So here's the first one, which is the water town one, right? So these sketches, they're pretty quick. Again, we didn't have time because these are done purely for the presentation. So we had about maybe 2 days to do one of these scenes per designer. So here's one, but it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way these look. So you can see here's the entire dam. We have the water. We have the town behind here. We have that military building over here. And here's the majority village. They have some fishing, all function based, right? So water down here is rough, so they cannot fish here. It's much more calm over here. We have that single bridge leading in. So because my backstory for this is that water here is very precious, so they protect it militarily to keep at least the calm waters, the fishing waters, right? So this is the result of that piece. Let's go to the next one. This is the other shot from the other side. So here's the town. You can see the tower over here. Some people walking around, and all of this was based on the reference images. We did not make this stuff up. We just recombined the function. This comes from, this method, by the way, is using the ancient function one. I think, let's go back, let's find it. It's this one here. Boom, boom, boom. So you guys know what which one I'm using. Yeah, this one, swapping timeline, right? So swapping timeline is one, and the other one is this one, all right? The interesting location. We give ourselves a river, and we're going to put a function on top of this river, which is a dam. It all exists. But I chose a culture that's not European. I chose a culture that's Chinese, which tend not to build this type of dam. They do have dams, but it's a little different. So my job as a designer was to figure out the function using a Chinese architecture culture, time period, and put together the function. Okay, let's go all the way to where we were. Okay, we're here. Okay. And the last shot, I'll leave this here, right? That's the establishing view of the town. And then the last shot here is the interior of that space. So this could be the village elder. So it's got a pretty nice home. You can see the tower outside, right? So there's a fishing village. So got to think from a functional point of view. They're using these kind of not limestone, what do you call these? Sandstone, can't remember the name of these rocks, to build these, as well as lots of fish, lots of fishing nets, right? Because this is a fishing society. So we put all that function into here, but all this was referenced. The chairs, the furniture, the interiors, the materials, the fish, all this stuff was referenced. We simply retold the story. We reset the dressing, set dressing in these spaces to create a new space, but hopefully believable. So when an art director is looking at this kind of stuff, they're like, "Oh, this looks believable. We could put an RPG game in a world like this. We don't have to do a hard sell, right? You could see a game in which characters walk into space. We don't have to re-educate the audience of what's happening here. They should understand this world simply because we fed the right visuals and the right functionality. So they get that this is a dam town, dam town. Okay. Town that has a dam, and it has some military presence, and it has a Chinese, ancient China architecture to it. We don't have to do anything, in terms of like re-educating the audience of what this does. And that's the beauty of building portfolios off of this kind of philosophy, that this world is not an alien world. These towers are human. So art directors and anyone looking at it understands what you're trying to do purely from a visual versus like, what exactly am I looking at? Like, and then you have to be like, oh, it's because this, in ancient times, the planet Zophar has sent a mysterious crystal, and the crystal made this world. By that time, you already lost your interviewer. They're like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, what the heck am I listening to? So here, you could keep your mouth quiet. The visual sells itself. Okay, let's keep going here. Next, the dam thing, right? The imagining modern to old. So I go, okay, let's do an ancient, not damn, I said that, mining, ancient mining, okay? So I thought, okay, maybe they're mining for wars, precious metals, but again, ancient China as my culture. Remember this thing? Boom. Let's remind ourselves what we were, the formula. Okay. Culture, China, time period, 1200s, right? Function, mine, right? This is right. China, right? Time period, let's just say 1200s or even early. Wrong decimal. Okay, function is mine, but it's grand scale. So it's not just a tiny one, right? And then I gotta come up with it. So it's not that easy, but at least I have these. Okay, so if you're watching this, hopefully this is starting to make sense now. The whole point is to have this. So we still gotta do some work. So our maze is this big. Okay, that's our maze. Remember the other maze that was complex? That means this is not here, this is not here, this is not here, and you have a maze that's like this huge, and your chance of failing is very, very high. Even for pros, it's very hard to do. Okay, so I have 3 things coming here. All I gotta do is put it together. So let's go back to the mine. Okay, whoop, got a little too far here. So that's my first reference for the mine. Second reference for the mine or for people live. So I always like to do a far shot to establish it, a medium shot, and then interior shot. This generally is a good way to sell your environments. Okay, so here's where the people live. Maybe it's super cold, they're poor. Generally, people that work in the mines are not treated that well, right? The stuff they dig up is precious, but the people themselves are generally not treated that well. So I'm thinking, okay, they probably live in caves, and it's pretty cold, it's pretty rackety. They definitely are not living in luxury. Okay. These buildings, by the way, are pretty luxurious, but I'm using the architectural elements of how they hang on cliffs. But I'm not going to use this styling because it's too rich. Okay, all right, but it's all ancient China. Okay, so here are my first batch of sketches, try to figure out how this works. So you can see side views drawings, right? They're not that good, doesn't matter. It's for yourself. Here's the mine themselves, the steps, the town, the location where they are, right? Just trying to figure everything out. Next sketch. Right, here's how the homes will look. So we have a big cave. The people live inside this cave. They have these kind of wooden stilts where they walk. A couple of guard towers because, again, the things are digging up are pretty expensive. So you're going to have some guards to prevent theft and other nations from stealing it. And then we have the smelter room where they take the metals and melt them down into ingots. And then, of course, these are some of the cameras. So next shots, I took all this, given to my team, and here are some of the results. Right, so here's the establishing shot of mining town, ancient Chinese mining town. So we have the mines down here at a much grander scale than ancient times. Here they put all the rocks, all the stuff they dug up onto these donkeys. Right? These are still pretty raw. They still have a lot of 3D in them, but they get the point across, right? And so they take these donkeys, they go up these mountains. You can see all the towers back here, and then all the smelters and all the stuff are back here. So this is our establishing shot. So I'll leave it here for a second so you can see that. I'm pretty happy with this. It looks pretty cool. It got the point across. Now here's the town themselves, right? So it's snowing, it's super harsh conditions. You can see the guard tower here. Here's the cave to hopefully get the houses out of the elements, right? So it's fantasies. World like this does not exist. But to stress again, every single piece in here does exist. And that's the whole point of solving the 80% of your work by getting functional things from the real world and adding just your 10% of essentially recombining things. That's all you're doing. We're actually not designing anything. Everything here exists. Okay, now let's do some interiors. Right, here's the interior of one of these poor people's homes. So all this again comes from reference board I heard earlier. The baskets, the wooden structure, how they're kind of secured. The stove. Yep. Here's another shot of the interior, different angles, the beds, right? How they sleep back in the days, all referenced. No design, no design in the sense that we came up with our own bed design, came up with our own architecture. All this stuff is just functional driven, okay? And of course the smelter, right? And all this is referenced as well. So we took some ancient smelters from that time period, but now we put it inside a house. So that took some rearrangement. Here then you can see the donkeys coming in with the horses with the big raw rocks. They put it in the smelters, the stuff melts, and they're going to mold. I can't say it correctly. Mold, and we turn that into a ingot, and then that ingot is then shipped off to be sold, okay, or to blacksmith to make it into something. Right? So this is the interior of the ancient Chinese mining town, which again does not exist. well, existing to a different visual. But this one is our made-up world. But the made-up world contains 80 to 90% real elements. Okay, and that's the point I'm trying to make for your portfolios. Okay, we have more examples. 1920 Shanghai. Okay, so remember earlier I mentioned period pieces are great to have in your portfolio, and you don't even have to design a single thing. All you gotta do is get a bunch of good references and use it. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, I need a black background here so you can see the images. First one, here's the establishing shot of a Shanghai from 1920s, 1930s. So we reference all the buildings, all the cards down here. I love this stuff, you know, like, I don't know if you guys seen the movie Kung Fu Hustle, you know, that time period. It's just so fun because you have a really good mix of West and the East. You have technology starting to introduce into China. You got cars showing up, buses, electric trams. So it's a pretty hustling, bustling kind of city. Great background to place a story behind. So as a concept designer, look, you just retell history. We're not designing this building from scratch. We're getting it all from reference, but we're placing it in a way that this is not accurate to Shanghai. You cannot find this street, but the audience are not going to care, you know, because we're not doing the perfectly historic accurate project here, but we're using the background of Shanghai to place everything the way we want. So every single element is real, but the location is not exactly real. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys, right? So we're not designing our own stuff, but the city itself is designed in a way that is not real in terms of placement. Okay, so that's an establishing shot of the Shanghai city. Here is a ground level scene, you know, street view. So we've got the trams like San Francisco, right? We have all the banks at the time period. Of course, rich people, you know, with the hats, they could ride these rickshaws, reading newspaper. Here's a newspaper stand. This guy's trying to sell paper to this car, right? Because back then, if you own a car, you're really, really rich. So regular people, they're riding on the trams, the buses. You have the ancient Shanghai advertising back here, bicycles, kids running around, you know. Pretty cool stuff. Really takes you to that time period. And again, you could apply this to so many entertainment products. If you had a portfolio, art directors could see this and see, oh, cool. Maybe you know, we know how to use this designer when they come into a studio because they spend a lot of time researching and putting the things in the right places. Okay? So much better than a made-up world, especially for students. You know, if you look at an alien tower in the middle of nowhere, those visuals last a few seconds on screen and you're done with it because there's nothing deep about them. You look at it, it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's painted pretty well. Next, you know, but this kind of stuff, you can actually get into the world, especially if you have 5 to 6 pieces in a row, which I'm about to show you. You're starting to create this world, even though this world was real, but we're showing it in a light that maybe you haven't seen before. Okay, next, another street view, right? So you can see here, this is showing like a building from the outside, what that could look like. All right, some of the cars, actually the other one, did I cut it off by accident? Yeah, close enough, okay. So the car time period, the trolleys, right? Everything's researched. We spent some time getting the right references for the buildings, right? This one I skipped the reference, by the way, because we don't need to repeat it. You guys can find this on Google as well. Just type in 1920s, 1930s Shanghai. You get tons of references for this. So all the stuff is correct, the telephone poles and so forth. Probably a little more pigeons than for reals, but it looks kind of cool. All right, next one is inside this building. We put a rich guy's office, all right? So we put kind of like a foreigner. This guy maybe is an art collector. So his office, what does he see? So he's got European influence in his office, even though he's in Shanghai. So he imported probably like chairs from France and tables from England and so forth. And you can see on the floor here, he has a lot of ancient Chinese artifacts that he's going to ship back into Europe. So it's got some Chinese vases and so forth. But so the architecture here is all real. Everything is referenced. Every single furniture is referenced, but we're telling a story, and things like that are used in games like Assassin's Creed, you know, Tomb Raider, a variety of movies. So you can see how functional portfolio pieces like these are in terms of helping you find a job. Okay, so let's keep going here. I have a bunch of these. This is a research center, right, along with the whole Shanghai thing. So you can see the Chinese treasures. These guys are working in an office in Shanghai. They're taking these ancient art pieces and making notes on them and trying to categorize them for museums, right? So pretty cool, right? And all these were referenced, the architecture style, all the elements in here, all the tables, the shelves, the lamps, mostly all correct to the time period. Okay, what's this one? Another piece, right? Interior, same thing. This is the foreigner side. So doing the same thing, but we're using London or English architecture here. So, and furniture from Europe. So, but they're also doing the same thing. So it's kind of like team A and team B. So these guys are looking at maps of China and categorizing all their ancient things in here. Same kind of thing. All referenced and put together. We have a bunch, you can see. Let's keep going here. Here's a warehouse where they're shipping some of these artifacts back into Europe. That's the idea behind this one. So you can see the workers taking these huge statues and putting them inside crates and telling that story. So referenced warehouse, reference how they do the cutting of these crates. Yeah, again, all referenced. And then, but the scene itself, you cannot find this on Google, right? So we gotta put it together. Okay. Here's a dock yard, right? So those cargo is going to go inside the ship. So here we are. This is the shipping crate that's coming in from Europe. They park here, and now it's going to load all that ancient artifacts into this ship. So beautiful Shanghai harbor feel to it. Ship reference, harbor reference, costume reference, everything reference. But this scene does not exist in reality. So let's keep going here. Where are we? Another shipyard, right? So this is a different ship design. Same idea here. We have the Bund of Shanghai to the right here, and we have this huge passenger / cargo ship over here. You can see here we put a name here coming in from Paris, right? So they're here to pick up, because at that time you had a lot of trading going back and forth between Western Europe and China. Trading of opium, trading of tea, trading of artifacts, jewelry, and in return the Europeans were bringing in opium, obviously one of them. They're bringing in clocks and furniture and so forth. So it's a very good time period to build portfolios off of. All right. Let's keep going here. We have more. There's tons. Here's a train station. So I pick all the locations that are fun to sell in that time period. So why not? Like I said, if you're going to pick Paris as a city, then do the Eiffel Tower, do the museums, the Louvre and Versailles, right? These are things that are cool. Put it in a portfolio. All right. Let's keep going here. And I did a few temples. These, let's run through real quick, but they're also kind of something for you guys to see, combining functionality and creating something new. So this village exists in the western parts of China, and we just kind of made the mountains a little bit taller, but it's pretty much real. So here's the thing I was talking about by using Photo Bash. Okay, so let's run through this real quick. So in the episode 96, is it? We're going to be doing some of this, okay? In which, look how ugly this thing is, like super ugly photo bashing. But the point is not to use this image to finish the image. The point is to use this to get the idea. So instead of sketching it out, we're going to use photos to composite. So you can see ugly mountains. We got some Chinese towers. Both of these real, by the way. Real and real, but combined, okay? And the functionality of these are going to be wind tunnels. You guys will see how that looks, okay? So by doing this, it starts to give me an idea in my head. It's like, hey, I think this could work. Visually, this is kind of iconic. It looks kind of interesting. I think I can make this work. So let's do another one. All right. Look at this ugliness here, right? Because this is internal, I don't care if this image looks good or not. I'm trying to use this to find my design. So once I have this, I go, okay, I think this will work. Bunch of towers on top of a mountain. They're going to have fans inside them and carry energy or power or whatever it is that they do, function driven. So using that, I can now do rough sketches, right? You can see here, I'm trying to figure out how this works. Here are the towers, here are the fans inside. The wind comes through and it's creating this wind tunnel effect, and maybe they put the shrines on the bottom, right? So this is me doing the industrial design pass, trying to figure out the functionality. Whoa. Okay, let me zoom this correctly. And of course, I'm putting some reference images for other designers to see. Okay, and with that, we could do rough sketches. Here's one of the roughs. Let me turn off some of these, you can see. Okay, so here's a rough sketch based on that photo bash, but now I'm drawing my own of the mountain itself with these towers on top and these people kind of climbing and going inside them. Based on that, we built this image here. You can see here, pretty cool. So this keyboard battery low, okay. Anyways, you get these towers on these mountains. Iconic, pretty cool, I like it. And it's a visual that we haven't seen before, but I repeated this 1,000 times now. We've seen every single element before. All we did is recombine. So we have this kind of 1960s, 1950s climber gear, right? And finding this kind of like a very Tomb Raider type of scenario here, right? This was combined functionality, different use. Next, once you go inside, you can see these wind tunnels blasting the hallways with cold wind. You have a tower in the background. So this in 3D looks like that. Okay, so pretty neat. And what else do we have? And just a few more images if you want to see some fun stuff that we did here. Again, just to show you guys, taking a village and a river, we kind of combining some of the elements and making another world that's hopefully grounded. You can see here, right? So all this stuff is made up, but recombined. So every element is real, but the environment itself is made up. But I believe this kind of stuff is so much better in a portfolio than simply just alien planets and alien towers, right? Look at these. Right, it's pretty cool. It's all done by my team in my studio. Okay, here's like them finding an ancient temple in the desert, and we're almost wrapping up here, so we're pretty much done. And here's the interior of that temple. They're looking for like mummies or something like that, you know. It has to go with the whole artifact thing that started with the Shanghai, so we kind of have fun with it as a team. We're like, hey, if we build all these ancient Shanghai, let's tell a story behind it. So maybe it's like two teams trying to find these ancient treasures to take back to sell or make money, who knows, right? So this is one of the teams finding the temple in the desert and bringing it back. So anyways, today I think this is run long enough as an episode. Hopefully this covered a lot. I know I spilled out a ton of information to you guys, so you probably want to watch this twice or so forth. But in episode 96, I'll go back and start to design these according to all the things in here. So we'll go through a bunch of these, and that should give us at least 10 episodes worth of information. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. I certainly loved making this thing. I think it's very beneficial, especially for those students who watched it. They all say that this inspired them to start to work on their portfolios in the right direction. So hopefully you find that useful as well. And I will wrap it up here. So thank you for watching. And this is Feng Zhu signing off. See you guys in episode 96. Bye-bye.